Thanks, Matt, and thanks to all our panelists. I guess just to recap very simply, the questions that I raised to start this off. Why malaria? Because it's the #1 killer of children in Africa. And because, quite frankly, it's not possible for Africa to move forward, to rise, if we don't conquer death by malaria. Why now? Because maybe for the first time in history, we actually have the tools and the opportunity to do this. This is not speculative that we're talking about here. This is something that we can do, and we're in the perfect place to do it. What I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about is answering what I think is the most important question, one that certainly those of you who work in the offices in this building and here in Capitol Hill, that you hear from policymakers all the time, that they hear all the time from constituents. Why us? Why can't China do this? Why can't somebody else do this? Why is it always the U.S. that has to step forward? Well, let me give you several very clear, very simple answers. Number one, why us? Because we'll do it. And they won't. And that's the sad reality. If we don't provide this help, if we don't step up and provide leadership, it won't happen. That's the simple reality of it. And if we don't do it, an African child will continue to die every 30 seconds from malaria. Reason number two, I would argue to you it is in our interest, our self-interest, to do this. Yes, what you heard about in terms of our contributions, it is the generous thing to do, it is the moral thing to do, it is the compassionate thing to do, but it's also in our self-interest. These contributions help America and help America's image in a troubled world during troubled times. Without getting on my soapbox for too long, as the ambassador who represented and served in Zanzibar on the mainland of Tanzania, let me tell you that this is important for our security interests. I would never say to you that poverty causes terrorism, because it's not true. But what I will say to you is that it makes sense for America to attack those conditions which can lead to despair, because despair is something that extremists can exploit. It is in our interest to attack those conditions and to be seen attacking those conditions. And third, even beyond the security realm, it is in our interest during these times to make friends and to have strong friends around the world. You know, I think we all get the sense that if there's an ebb and flow to history, that history is being written a little quickly these days. Well, I would argue to you that during these times when history is being written rather quickly, friendship is much more important than anything else. Not just alliances, but friendships. In 2007-2008, according to the Pew Global Attitudes Survey, positive impressions of Americans went up more in Tanzania than any other country in the world. Now, I wish I could tell you it's because the ambassador was doing such a good job, but I'd be lying to you. And I'm not running for anything, so I won't lie to you. What I will say to you that if we did anything, my embassy, my mission team, it's because, well, what we did, I think, was to shine a light on the good works that have been referenced here. And we let people know inside the country about what we were doing through PMI and what we were doing through the Global Fund in numerous projects led by our NGO partners. And I can tell you that it made a huge impression upon Africans. I mean, Africans understand that we don't get malaria. African leaders understand that there isn't a great domestic constituency in Wausau, Wisconsin. You're not going to hear members of Congress getting up and campaigning and putting out literature saying, yeah, I'm working on malaria. They understand it. They appreciate it. They know that working shoulder to shoulder with them is done not because we're looking for anything. But we value their friendship. We want to help them conquer the challenges that they face. Let me wrap up with a couple of stories and then open up to questions. Stories that mean a lot to me when it comes to malaria. I'm a malaria survivor, by the way, from my days as a volunteer teacher in Kenya some time ago. But what I remember most specifically about malaria from those days, and again, Matt was a volunteer in Kenya as well. I remember the day that, as a teacher, I was getting ready to hand out the blue books for final exams. And I went into the classroom, and there were a small group of students getting ready. And one boy, Alex Luciolo, one of my prized students, was getting ready to take his book. And as I turned to walk away, I heard a bang, and I turned around, and there was Alex on the ground having seizures, going into fits in the cerebral malaria. And I remember trying to figure out what it is that I'm going to do about this. And I brought in his mother, Monica, a very simple, wonderful lady, hardworking lady, very, very desperately poor. She paid his tuition by working it off as the gardener at the school and trying to explain to her that this boy must be taken to a clinic. The faith healer, it's not going to work. This boy must be taken to the clinic. She didn't have the money. We were able to help her out. But I also know that she didn't have the means to keep it up. And I also heard that not so long later, Alex had a relapse and he passed away. One of my prized students, a young man who could have been something. Africa cannot move ahead without conquering malaria. It's very simple. But finally, on a note of optimism, we've heard some references to Zanzibar. And again, Zanzibar was one of my favorite places in the world. And we did a lot of work in Zanzibar. In Zanzibar, we have something now that we call the Sentinel Surveillance System. Because we have, working together up here, the groups that we represent, we have all but conquered malaria, and it is down below 1%. And so now what we have done is we've distributed free mobile phones to different places on the islands so that we have the ability to monitor. And if there is that outbreak, the people with the mobile phones just send a quick text message and we pounce in with some of the treatments that you've heard reference to. And our groups up here that we represent pulling together, and the ministry, the health ministry in Zanzibar pulling together, they're absolutely bound and determined to get to that point of elimination. So, there are the Alex Luciolos of the world still out there. It's a terrible thing. It happens each and every day. But there are also places in the world where all of us can show this actually works. This is something that we can do. And what we want to get to is that point where we're doing sentinel surveillance all across the continent. We can get there, and we can get there in the time frame that you've just seen referenced up there. So, what we're asking of you, among other things, is to those of you who represent member offices, join the Congressional Malaria Caucus. You know, we're looking for ways to get information from you, to disseminate information and take up this cause on Capitol Hill. And obviously what else you can do is to talk about what you've heard from the folks who are here to my right and the great work that they're doing and the groups they represent in standing up for that cause. If we do that, we'll get to where we need to be. So again, I want to thank the panelists for being here today and open it up to all of you for questions that you might have.